Welcome back to the Upside Sports Network. My name is Michael. Appreciate you guys joining us a little late in the evening anyway. Long day at work, but there's a lot of news that happen around the world of baseball. So let's kind of jump right in. There's a lot of stories we'll get to. We'll even touch on some NFL news as well, but just mainly want to focus on the MLB right now. There's a lot of news to get to. First and foremost, the most recent news, Clayton Kershaw seems like he is going to stay in Los Angeles. Now, while LA was the favorite all along, there was some speculation out there that he may retire, that he may end up going to Texas and going to play for his hometown team, that kind of thing, be closer to family. Obviously, he's made it work in LA for the last 15 years, however long he's been in LA. So LA was kind of his second home anyway. That's why LA was always the favorite to begin with. And I think even if he had won the World Series this year, there might have even been a greater chance that he might leave LA just because, hey, he'd accomplished it. He conquered the hill one more time. Now he wants to kind of finish out his career, on the back nine, if you will. But it seems like he wants to keep it going, and the decisions that the Dodgers made today made it possible for them to be able to get a deal done for Clayton Kershaw. We'll see what the number ends up being for him, but for right now, it seems like Clayton Kershaw will be a Dodger next season. Those decisions that they made, most notably, is that they declined the option on Justin Turner. That freed up about $16 million in payroll anyway, around that number anyway, in payroll for them. They should be able to cover that position at third base a little bit more cheaply, maybe even bringing back Justin Turner, but they freed up some money by making that decision, and that's why they're able to get the deal done so far, it seems, with Clayton Kershaw. We'll see what the number ends up being. I'm expecting somewhere in the neighborhood of a one-year deal, probably in the $20 to $22 million range. He's still an effective pitcher. Changed the way he pitched this year as opposed to previous years. Different pitch sequencing, different usage of pitches, those kinds of things, and kind of made himself a little bit better pitcher, if you will, at this point of his career, and maybe even have extended his career by a good 2 or 3 years if the numbers hold going into next year. But thank you guys for joining us really early on. Just wanted to thank all you guys for subscribing over the past few days. But if you haven't hit the subscribe button already, please do so. And make sure you hit that like button as well. Other news around Major League Baseball. The Padres have re-signed relief pitcher Robert Suarez. A little bit surprising considering the contract that he got. 5 years at $46 million was the number, and one of the largest guarantees ever for a pitcher who's not necessarily a closer out of the bullpen. Now, apparently the Padres are looking at kind of the relief core. They've done interesting things in the bullpen in the past. Think back to the Drew Pomeranz contract that they gave out a few years back. That obviously didn't work out in their favor. They have Josh Hader, of course, that they brought in from the Brewers last season as kind of their ninth inning guy that they'd like to see stay in that role. But Robert Suarez, anyway, was a very good middle relief type of pitcher, seventh, eighth inning guy. Got a lot of run in the postseason as well, so we'll see if he kind of continues that progression anyway with the Padres. Other news out of San Diego is that Nick Martinez, who signed a 4-year, $20 million deal last offseason with the team, has decided to opt out of that contract. A little bit surprising to see him opt out, but he did perform very well last year. We should see him get something a little bit more guaranteed money, perhaps, something along those lines. Maybe a little bit more average annual value on that deal. Maybe an $8 million average annual value, something like that would be a very good contract for Nick Martinez. But he seems to be wanting to capitalize on the production that he provided with the Padres this past season. Trade in Major League Baseball. Those Pittsburgh Pirates, we never really talk about the Pirates because they've been a rebuilding club for the past, 4 years now. They haven't been able to get it right, and it seems like they're at least trying to add around the edges, if you will. They know they're not necessarily going to be contenders next year for a World Series, but they should still be a little bit better. Their young players look like they're about a year away from being able to break into the major leagues. They look like their rebuild will probably be over at the end of 2023, so they're adding some pieces around the edges right now. The trade that they made, they brought in Ji-Man Choi from the Tampa Bay Rays. Tampa Bay has had about 4 players on the market over the past few days. Yanni Chirinos, Nick Anderson was one of them. He was DFA'd, or set on waivers anyway. There still may end up being a deal there. And there's one other player. But Ji-Man Choi was one of those players that was expected to be moved, and the Pirates do get the deal done. Now, they've done similar moves like this in the past for first basemen, so this kind of fits the rapport that they have between the two teams. Now, of course, the biggest news of the day is the qualifying offer deadline has come and gone. We saw 14 players ultimately get the qualifying offer. We'll show you that to you guys here in just a moment. But I want to say hello to Anthony. Appreciate you joining us. Kent, you're back again. Really appreciate that. Kershaw, yes, he's off the board. And yes, it is indeed a lot faster than last year. Last year, if you'll remember correctly, he kind of held the Rangers hostage as far as $20 million in payroll that they had to kind of set aside for him and just not really, or have it earmarked for him if he wanted to go to the Rangers last year. That's not going to be the case this year. Now the Rangers can go ahead and say, hey, All right, we have some resolution with Clayton Kershaw. We don't have to save a spot in a rotation for him, and so they're going to go out and be very active on both the free agent market and the trade market for starting pitching. You saw the move yesterday for Jake Odorizzi, $2.5 million commitment to him. Not a whole lot for a number 5 starter. We'll see if he can continue that progression that he showed with Houston last year. Backed up a little bit in Atlanta, but very good transaction for the Rangers. But they're looking at the top of the market. They've already been in contact with a number of the top free agent starters out there. Carlos Rodon, Jacob deGrom. They've even talked to Taijuan Walker's camp as well. But there's some definitely some starters that they're looking at. They also extended a qualifying offer to Martin Perez. But that's kind of where everything stands right now. But let's kind of look at that qualifying offer screen. Let me get that popped up here for you. Get that up on my screen for y'all. There we go. So for those of you who are wondering who actually received the qualifying offer, the list is here. There's the list on the screen. You can see it right now. Aaron Judge, obviously the Yankees, no doubt he was going to get a qualifying offer. He was not going to accept that offer. Trey Turner also got a qualifying offer, will not accept that offer. Xander Bogaerts, Jacob deGrom, Dansby Swanson, Carlos Rodon, and Brandon Nimmo, all guarantees to not accept the qualifying offer. Now is where you get into the interesting cases as to whether or not they should or should not accept the qualifying offer. First and foremost, Wilson Contreras. It sounds like he's going to go ahead and deny that qualifying offer already. He is going to be the top catcher on the free agent market right now. The catching market, though, on the trade market is going to be very active. Sean Murphy, one of the best catchers in all of baseball the last couple of years anyway, is not going to have a home in Oakland next year. They're going to go with Shea Langeliers, their top prospect that they got in the Atlanta Braves deal for Matt Olson, as their catcher next season. That means Sean Murphy is going to be the top trade target for teams looking for a catcher. There's a number of possibilities that it could go to, but if for my money, Wilson Contreras should still have a robust catching market. Obviously, Chris Bassett also got a qualifying offer from the Mets. I expect that to be denied as well. You're looking for probably a 4 or 5 year term for Chris Bassett, as he's on the wrong side of 30 right now, so he's going to try to cash in as much as possible. Interesting case for Anthony Rizzo is that he's going to get a little bit of a bump anyway if he decides to accept the offer, which is why it's interesting to see if he accepts the offer and takes the 1 year deal with the Yanks and tries to rebound his offensive numbers this year. He has always had great defense. He's always had great leadership, but for the money right now, Anthony Rizzo on a 1 year deal, that might work for him. But if he wants long-term security, maybe the Yankees will say, hey, we'll give you that long-term contract, but at a lower AAV. That way they can save some money for Aaron Judge. Tyler Anderson, there was curious to see whether or not the Dodgers would ultimately end up giving him a qualifying offer after being kind of a middling type player for the Dodgers for the first, we'll call it 5, 6 years, or the first several years of his career. This past year anyway is the first time he's ever had any exemplary levels of success, both in strikeout rate, walk rate, and just overall effectiveness. He was fantastic for them. They ultimately do decide to offer him a qualifying offer. I don't think he'll accept it. I think there's money out there for him. Starting pitching is a little bit thin this year on the market, so we'll see what ends up happening with him. Martin Perez was expected to be getting a qualifying offer from the Rangers if they weren't able to lock him up long term before the qualifying offer deadline. He may end up accepting the qualifying offer, but I still think the Rangers are going to be able to work out a long-term deal ultimately with Martin Perez. A little bit surprising one here, and Jock Peterson getting the qualifying offer from the Giants. He didn't really have a lot of money, or he didn't really have a big contract last year. I think it was a 1 year, $7 million $7 million deal that he signed with the Giants last season. I expected him to be traded at the deadline. Ultimately did not finish the season healthy, and we'll see what ends up happening with him this offseason. Now that he's been qualified, we'll see which offers, what kind of offers ultimately end up coming for him. But he's one of the few power hitters on this market right now, so he should still be able to command a healthy market if he doesn't accept the qualifying offer. But a $19.5 million payday for Jock Peterson, he might ultimately take the 1 year deal and say, "Hey, I'll go next year with a fully healthy season." Last but not least, you have Nathan Eovaldi. Curious to see what his market ultimately ends up looking like. He's got a few days anyway to decide whether or not to accept or decline the qualifying offer, but he has had trouble staying healthy. He may want to opt for a long-term deal rather than a 1 year payday, but those are kind of your qualifying offers right now. There's a few players out there who did not get qualified anyway, of that group anyway. Let's see if they have it down here at the bottom. There they are. Mitch Haniger, there was some discussion among the Mariners of whether or not they would ultimately give him a qualifying offer. They decided against it. He just hasn't been productive enough and stayed healthy enough since he's been in the big leagues. When he is healthy, though, he's a difference maker offensively, which is why there was some pause as to whether or not they would offer it. Jameson Taillon, same thing. Yankees are trying to save a little bit of money. I think if they had offered him a qualifying offer, he might have been able to accept that offer and go to free agency next season. But I'm expecting probably a contract in the neighborhood of like 4 years, 15, 4 years, $16 million for him. So he may end up declining that qualifying offer if it were to be extended to him. Still curious as to why the Yankees decided not to extend it to him. But Taijuan Walker is the other one for the Mets that had some discussion as to whether or not he would receive a qualifying offer. The other two players that you see on that list, Andrew Heaney and Michael Wacha, no chance they were going to be offered. But that's kind of where the qualifying offers were today. Apparently the Marlins are open to trading Pablo Lopez. In your honest opinion, who are your favorites to land him in trade? Well, if we were looking at the trade deadline, the Yankees were on the 1-inch line, apparently, of acquiring him. The Blue Jays have expressed interest in him in the past. There is some discussion anyway as to whether or not they're going to go after the international free agent Senga instead, though. But Pablo Lopez is going to have a robust market anyway on the pitching side anyway. But there's not a whole lot of pitching out there on the market this year as free agents, but there should be a healthy amount on the trade market. But for my money, for favorites anyway, I would still put the Yankees at the top of the list just because I still think they need starting pitching. I didn't think they had enough last year. They're going to lose a starting pitcher this year or two. But for my money, I would put the Yankees number one. Blue Jays, I don't think are going to be as interested this offseason as they were at the trade deadline. I think they were more gunning for the World Series and just didn't have enough, weren't able to get a deal done at that time. And I don't think they're going to push all their chips to the center right now. They have a lot of money tied up in that starting staff already. They had some poor performance anyway last year in their starters. We'll see if they get some bounce back performances and maybe add one starting pitcher like an international free agent like Senga. Welcome back, Jack. Traded Jonathan Taylor and his backup for James Conner, his backup, and Alan Lazard. Thoughts? Jonathan Taylor, Deion Jackson, for James Conner and Eno Benjamin. That's a pretty fair deal. I think Alan Lazard probably tips the deal in your favor, primarily because you're getting the receiver out of this deal as well. I'm curious to see with all the injuries and drops that receivers are having out of Green Bay, if Lazard ultimately ends up getting a much bigger role in the second half. We're seeing Green Bay really struggle this year, but that's kind of where I see things right now, Jack. You're a Marlins fan, so I want your thoughts on this trade. The Marlins get Brooks Lee, Jorge Polanco, and the Twins get Pablo Lopez, Khalil Watson, and Richard Blyer. Okay, Brooks Lee was the first-round pick for the Twins this past year. Jorge Polanco is a Major League player. I would probably take that deal if I'm the Twins by a mile. I'm not sure if I would do that as the Marlins. I understand that, getting a Major League player and you're getting a first-round type of talent, but I would rather have the starting pitcher by itself if I'm a Marlins fan. Now, of course, you still have plenty of starting pitching on your roster already. Some of it hasn't quite lived up to the hype, but if I'm looking at that trade, I still would want more for Pablo Lopez. But that's pretty fair value. I wouldn't include Watson or Blyer in the deal. But Pablo Lopez for Brooks Lee and Jorge Polanco would be decent for me. But as I mentioned, there's a lot of stories to get to around Major League Baseball. We've already touched on a couple of them. We talked a little bit about Clayton Kershaw, Robert Suarez. We talked about the Nick Martinez deal, or opting out anyway, G-Man Choi, and of course the Justin Turner opting out as well. But there was a lot of news today. Just kind of want to flip through some of those. Let me see if I can find them for you guys that I wrote down for y'all. Welcome in, boys. Appreciate you joining us. For all you guys just joining us for the first time, we do this. We're going to try to do this pretty much every day during the week and keep you guys updated on what's going around the world in baseball. There's a lot of movement right now, especially early on in free agency. A lot of qualifying offer talk. Seen a few free agents actually come off the board already, re-signings anyway. Edwin Diaz to the Mets. Clayton Kershaw seems like he's on the 1-inch line going back to the Dodgers. But we should see a very active free agency period for baseball as opposed to the last couple of years where they've been interrupted by COVID and lockout and all those kinds of things. Do you think Carlos Correa or Xander Bogaerts will ever sign with a team like the Marlins. No. Carlos Correa will only be on a playoff contending team. He tried the team that was on the fringes of being on the playoffs last year with the Minnesota Twins. That didn't work out. As a Minnesota Twins fan, very disheartening that we're not going to be able to keep a player like that in-house. But after a poor year, I mean, you can kind of see why he wants to go to a certified, bona fide contender. Xander Bogaerts is the epitome of consistency. He will be among the top free agents out there at the shortstop spot, and he's going to have competition among the top teams out there. The Phillies, the Dodgers, those types of teams, maybe even the Cubs, but I don't think a team like the Marlins will ever be at that level again. Welcome in, Giants fan. Appreciate you for joining us. Is Judge going to San Francisco? Well, if you guys watched last night, I told you guys if I had to handicap it right now, I'd probably put the race at still 40% likely that Judge goes back to the Yankees just because he's comfortable in New York, and I think New York's going to try to do everything they can to keep him. But I think the one team that might actually have a chance is the Giants. That's why they're probably second in my bidding for Aaron Judge right now. If I had to put a number on it, maybe 25%, just because they don't really have a top-end offer maximum, if you will. They're not going to be capped at, say, like $35 million, and if another team offers 36, they're like, we can't go another million. They're going to offer as much money as possible. I think that's why the bidding is going to get $40 million in average annual value or more for Aaron Judge. I'm expecting probably a 10-year, $400 million deal for Aaron Judge. I've seen some pundits go out there and say 10 for $325. Sorry, that's not happening. Aaron Judge is a far better free agent than anything that's ever been on the market. Granted, he is a little bit older at 31 years old when he hits the market, but the power that he brings, the lineup protection that he brings for any number of bats that you have in your lineup, the impact that he has just in ticket sales, off the field revenue, jersey sales, all those kinds of things will make a $40 million salary worth it, even in a long-term deal as long as 10 years. But to answer your question, is Judge going to San Francisco? Again, I'd probably say about 25%. I still think the Yankees ultimately end up getting him as long as they don't spend their money beforehand. Say like if Anthony Rizzo opts into his deal and Jameson Taillon re-signs for $16 million average annual value, then I think the Giants would have a much better chance at bringing in Aaron Judge because the Yankees are already looking at backup plans. They're looking at the international player Yoshida. They're also looking at bringing back Andrew Benintendi. There's a lot of outfielders that they're looking at for more of a contact type of a player. And even if they bring back Aaron Judge, I still expect them to go after another outfielder as well. So if you're a Yankees fan, keep your eyes peeled for what could happen as far as a contact-hitting outfielder to play maybe in left field, that kind of thing. But that's kind of where the Aaron Judge sweepstakes, in my mind, are going to end up. You have a major prediction for this offseason, and I want your thoughts. I have Aaron Judge signing a 10 for $550. I think your average annual value is off just a little bit on that one. Average annual value of $550 contract is $55 million. But just to kind of look at that deal, I mean, $500 million. There was conversation a few years ago about Mike Trout possibly being the first $500 million player in Major League Baseball. Ohtani could very well be that guy next offseason, but I just don't think the market is quite ready for that level of contract right now. I just think we need to see it regularly $400 million before we see a $500 just absolutely blow the cap off of these teams. But I think that the numbers are going to get really astronomical for Aaron Judge. Purely laughable just because of how much money is going to go into one player. Just think about it this way. You could have two $20 million starting pitchers for the price that it's going to cost you to get Aaron Judge. And say it does happen. Say it gets to 10 at $500 million. That's $50 million a year going to Aaron Judge. There are payrolls in Major League Baseball that are below that. Just saying. Alrighty. But that's kind of where everything's at right now. Let's go over some of the detail or some of the information that I got for you guys today. Let me pull that up for you guys. There we go. We already talked about the Clayton Kershaw news. A little bit of NFL news. It sounds like Odell Beckham Jr. has a lot of interest in going to the Cowboys. We'll talk about that in another live that we'll do for you guys tomorrow evening. But just to kind of give you highlights from the NFL, that was one of the stories out today. There we go. The Yankees, I was just mentioning that they had interest in an international outfielder. His name was Yoshida. He hit 21 home runs, 88 RBIs, hit 335 last year with a slug of 561 in 119 games this past season. That would be very good production. If that translates over to Major League Baseball, you're looking at an all-star level of player. Now, as far as the Yoshida, trying to see if they have his age on here. Don't see it on there. But he should still come over and have an impact. Just the question is, how big of an impact will he have? I mentioned that the Toronto Blue Jays had checked in on Kodai Senga. He's the international player from Korea. He's 31-year-old, actually a complete free agent. He's not subject to the posting system. There's expected to be heavy interest in him because of that. The Rangers, the Cubs, the Blue Jays, the Mariners, the Padres, the Dodgers, the Yankees have all been listed, have all been interested in him in the past. Where was he from? I believe Korea. Or excuse me, Japanese. He's a Japanese player. He has a 2.59 earn run average in NPB. Do you think a salary cap would work in baseball, and when do you expect them to install the international draft, if it's ever going to happen, or is that a BS rumor? There will be an international draft. It was part of the collective bargaining agreement that they were able to strike this past off season anyway. That they were going to have to hammer one out during the season. Obviously, that never really got hammered out. That will likely get done this off season. I expect Major League Baseball to say, "Hey, we ain't going any further until we get this thing locked out." I'm wondering if they're going to get it done before baseball winter meetings, just so that they can have a clear off season the rest of the way. But there will be an international draft. As far as a salary cap, there will never be a salary cap in Major League Baseball. The Players Union is going to see to it that that never happens. That's why they fight so hard to get that luxury tax up as high as it can go. Threshold anyway, as high as it can go. But the penalties are what kind of function as a salary cap right now in Major League Baseball. That's why there will never be one. The Players Union will never allow there to be a salary cap because literally it's a cap. You can't go above that. That's why that will never happen. Exactly. Welcome in, Robert. Appreciate you guys for joining us. We got about 15 of you guys with us right now. Just want to say welcome to every single one of you guys. If you haven't subscribed already, please do so. We put out content from MLB, NFL, NBA, and the NHL. Both live videos, we do games as well, and we'll put out short videos whenever some major news breaks. So if you want to follow us here at the Upside, feel free. We really appreciate those of you who have. See if we can reach 900 by the end of the video. We're only like 8 subscribes away from it. So if you guys wouldn't mind, it would really help us out. Thank you in advance. But some of the other news from around Major League Baseball. We talked a little bit about the Marlins shopping Pablo Lopez. I had a question earlier about where he might end up going. If I had to guess where he would go, right now, as I mentioned, I think the Yankees would still have the most interest in him because they have to they have to improve that starting rotation, and they have to do it cheaply because they're going to try to bring back Aaron Judge. They're going to try to bring back Anthony Rizzo. They would like to bring back Jameson Taillon, but I think his price is going to be too high. That's why they have to make a move on a guy like Pablo Lopez and maybe look at the back end of their rotation for some improvement. Look at the Rangers, the move they just made for Jake Odorizzi. That type of a move is what the Yankees could do to try to fill out their rotation and fill out their depth as well. Well, I've been following baseball since, I don't know, I could walk, I suppose. I've tried to follow everything that I possibly can, follow every number, every transaction as deep as I can, but my open to close days try to keep me behind a little bit, at least by a few hours, but I try to catch up on that as soon as I get home. Not just about baseball, though. Football, same thing. Basketball, same thing. Hockey, same thing. I try not to miss too much. In terms of posting for you, besides Asia, is there any more big established players from Mexico, or Cuba or Mexico that are going to be signing for big money? Not really this year. There's no big free agent on the horizon right now, but the international draft, I think, is going to get some resolution this offseason. The issues the Yankees or the Marlins apparently were asking for Oswald Peraza or Anthony Volpe in a trade, and the Yankees don't want to give them up. Is Lopez worth Volpe or Peraza? Peraza, absolutely. In fact, I think he's worth Peraza plus maybe 2 other top-level prospects out of the Yankee system, and maybe some change as well. The flexibility Lopez has as far as the contract cost anyway, and the production that he provides. He still has some up and down performances every now and again, but he's still worth Peraza. Now, is he worth Volpe? A year ago, I would have said yes. This year, though, I think Volpe's value is just a little bit too high to say that it's worth Volpe plus. Now, I could hear an argument for Lopez versus Lopez and Volpe having very similar trade value. But if I'm the Yankees, if you're asking for Volpe, I say no. I just don't see the value in doing that type of a move, especially when you're trying to save money and you basically are looking for a very cheap, cost-effective option at shortstop. You already went the Isaiah Kiner-Falefa way, and it was nice, but you're looking for a better impact. What do you think the key shortstops will make in free agency this year? Okay, so for shortstops, the top four are going to be Bogarts, Turner, Correa, and Swanson, not necessarily in that order. For me, I think the top of the market is going to be Trey Turner. I think he probably gets north of $35 million a year this year. I'm expecting probably a contract in the neighborhood of between 6 and 10 years. Just kind of depends on which team is really out there trying to get him. If there's a team, say, let's not necessarily in contention, is trying to sway him by the length of the deal by 10 years at 35, then I could see him going to a team like, say, the Cubs. But I don't really see that happening. There's just too many rumors going around between him and the Philadelphia Phillies. I think that's a match made right now that's going to happen. As far as contract, 6 years, $35 million average annual value. As far as Bogarts, I'm expecting somewhere in the neighborhood of like a 10, 275, somewhere in there. Think of the Javier Baez contract as a possible comp. Think of the offer that the Tigers gave to Carlos Correa as another comp as well. Somewhere in that range is what Bogarts is going to get. I don't think he'll end up signing for anything less than $250 million, though. I think he's looking for a long-term deal, and I don't think it will ever happen with the Boston Red Sox. They're looking at backup options already. They were looking at backup options before the season even ended. Trevor Story was their acquisition last year, 6 years, $140 million. He had a poor first year, but part of that was playing a new position. I think he slides over nicely over to short, has another year in Boston, gets a little bit more comfortable with the city, back to his old playing position on the diamond, isn't focused on his defense as much every single day because he's familiar with the position. And so I think his bat will vastly improve for the Red Sox. The question for them is whether or not they keep Devers as well. But to kind of round out the conversation on the shortstops, I think Correa ends up going to the Dodgers because they're going to lose Trey Turner. They're interested in going after Aaron Judge. I don't think that's going to happen. Mookie Betts actually offered to play second base if they were to bring in a guy like Aaron Judge. In case you're wondering, Mookie Betts has played second base before in the minor leagues. That's why he made that offer to say, hey, Dodgers, we are all about winning. We need to improve our lineup. We had 4 good hitters last year. We're going to lose 1 hitter already, Trey Turner, out east. So we need to improve our lineup. And so that was his way of trying to help the organization. Last but not least, Dansby Swanson. He's going to go to the highest bidder. I think the Braves are trying to pinch every penny they can. That's why they basically shipped out $10 million along with Jake Odorizzi just to shave off $2.5 million in payroll. Now, of course, they still got back a starting pitcher, somebody who could give them depth, probably more of a AAA pitcher at this point in his career. He hasn't really proven the ability to stay in major leagues, but that's kind of where the market's going to end up. As far as how much, Dansby Swanson's the best defender out of the group by a mile. Very good player as far as base runner as well. The bat, though, this was the first year he had above average production anyway at a consistent level from the shortstop position. And the bat, I think, is what's going to keep him from getting the numbers of a Correa or a Bogarts in free agency. I'm still expecting probably a 6-7 year deal for Swanson, probably in the neighborhood of $210, $190 million, somewhere in there. All right, get to some of these other comments anyway. Welcome in, Bryce. Appreciate you joining us. What do you think the Yanks do? I think Gleyber gets traded, definitely. I don't know about that. I'm curious to see what they do with him. He's been kind of a mercurial player for them. They've been trying him out at short. They tried him out at second. He's had up and down production. His first year with the Yankees obviously was his best year. It's been still kind of up and down for them, though. I just don't see them trading Gleyber Torres, especially with all the other things they have to focus on their mark or that they have on their plate this offseason. Now, I could see an argument that at the trade deadline, maybe they move Gleyber Torres in an acquisition type of a move to bring in an ace level pitcher, something like that at the deadline. But this offseason, I don't think Gleyber's going to move. I think their focus is going to be on adding starting pitching, maybe dealing from their minor league depth if they decide to add via trade in a guy like Pablo Lopez. But primarily, they're going to be looking to bring back Anthony Rizzo and Aaron Judge, obviously. I think Jameson Taillon's time in New York is over. Oswald Peraza, Spencer Jones, and Austin Wells to the Marlins for Pablo Lopez. Let me change this up real quick. Bear with me for just a moment while I pull this up. I want to pull up the top 30 for the Yanks anyway. I just want to see where they rank. Okay, so Wells is the catcher. Spencer Jones. To answer your question, Bryce, no, that's not an overpay. Or to your comment anyway. Looking at the stats anyway here. 2 teams last year. He's an A-ball rookie anyway for Spencer Jones. First round pick last year. There is some serious value there though. As far as Austin Wells, AA player. Last year in AA hit 261. That's pretty good. That's a pretty fair offer if I'm looking at that offer anyway from the Marlins perspective. From the Yankees, I understand the trepidation of giving away 3 premium assets anyway, but you're not giving away Volpe, you're not giving away Dominguez, who I don't think has that much value, or I don't think has as much value as everybody else does. But in my opinion, I would say that's a pretty close to fair offer. You might have to add, a small piece going back to the Yankees, maybe a bullpen arm, just to round out the deal for the Yanks. But that's actually a pretty fair offer there, Anthony. I'll show you guys a site here in a minute that helps you kind of gauge the trade value of the trade offers you guys make. Just kind of gives you an idea of what might or might not be accepted by another team. You agree in your term for Dansby Swanson, the kid is still growing into his power. I think he might have more power than we don't see right now. I don't even think it's about the power for Dansby Swanson. I think it's more about his production at the plate, just bat-to-ball skills, those types of things, being able to hit for a consistent average. If he can turn his bat into anything near a Xander Bogaerts, then you're looking at a definite top, 5 shortstop in the game. I don't think that bat will ever get there, which is why I think he's the fourth best free agent shortstop on the market. And I think he's still going to get a very good payday, but I think he's going to be paid more for his defense and base running, while maybe he hits 270 on an average year. There we go. So in case you guys are wondering, this is the site I like to use to kind of see your trade simulator, all those kinds of things. You can even click on this trade boards to see all kinds of different trades that are out there that people are offering, just to kind of get an idea what other people think of your trade, etc. Obviously, you can see this type of a deal. The trade that just happened, the Colby Allard, it literally represents 0 value for either team. The Jake Odorizzi had negative value, of course, with that $12.5 million deal. The inclusion of the $10 million basically made it a win for the Rangers because they get a starting pitcher for $2.5 million. That's about what I would expect that deal to look like. So this site is absolutely fantastic. Yeah, it's fantastic, Bryce. That's why, if you guys want to make some trade offers, use this site and just give me some realistic options as opposed to, I love seeing these trade offers where they're like, yeah, I'll give you, an A-ball pitcher, another A-ball catcher, 2 prospects for, Francisco Lindor. That's not a legitimate trade offer. Make sure you're actually making sense of your trades before you actually send them to us. So if you guys want to, check out that site, it's baseballtradevalues.com. Kind of very similar to the NBA trade machine that ESPN has, but this is very much more about baseball and actually calculates the value of prospects a lot better than most of the other sites. I see a lot of people trying to use, Madden for the NFL, or they're trying to use EA, or they're trying to use the show for their trade proposals, and I'm like, that's not realistic. I mean, that's a video game, people. But this is a lot more realistic. So if you guys want to just kind of check out some ideas, like for instance, this one here, a lot of responses on this one from November 4th, over 100 responses on the Pirates side, where the Brian Reynolds goes to the Dodgers for a few prospects anyway, kind of gives you an idea what the value would be like. So the site, again, was baseballtradevalues.com. You can see it there at the top of the screen. The other site that I like to use to kind of keep up with all the sports stories is MLBTradeRumors.com. They've stayed independent largely, and they put out a lot of their own content. For instance, we'll talk about this article here in just a minute. The top 50 free agents with predictions, kind of give whether or not that makes a lot of sense. They do a lot of work. Supposedly, they released a statement yesterday saying they worked on this article for over a month. Okay, but I mean, it's still an article and it's still a projection. I mean, there's Fangraph projections out there that give you an idea of what these contracts could look like, but This one here was the qualifying offers. That was the site I was giving you guys for that one. But baseballtradevalues.com is the site I like to use. But just want to welcome in a couple of new viewers. Saw a few of you joined us in the last few minutes. Appreciate you guys subscribing to us previously. If you haven't already subscribed, really would appreciate that if you would. Trying to get to 900 by the end of the stream, so we only need a few more. So if you haven't hit that subscribe button already, please do so. Thank you very much in advance. Thank you very much. Alrighty, so let's check out a few more of these stories anyway. The Yankees, they already committed to Josh Donaldson. They are going to keep him around for another year. They don't really have another option anyway at third base. It's a one-year deal left on the contract. He had his ups and downs in his first year in New York. Obviously, the skirmish that he had with Tim Anderson during the middle of the season, resulting in being out for a few games during the middle of the year. Hopefully he cleans it up this year, has a little bit better of a bounce back year offensively. He still provided some protection to that lineup. They rely heavily on their power potential anyway in that lineup, and he kind of fits the lineup that they have. You want to see the trade of Jones, Wells, and Peraza? We can do that. Let me sign in real quick. See if it remembers me. Okay, so the trade that he had was the Marlins, and the Yankees. So the Marlins, well, I didn't like the transaction at all when they made it, but they're sticking with it. I mean, I don't know what else you were going to do at the position, but still. All right, so just kind of looking at the value. Lopez right now, 38.7, going to the Yankees. Yankees on the other side of it. Peraza has very high value according to this site. I'm not sure it's still that high because he didn't have the greatest second half of the year, if you will. That value is going to come down. Same thing with Dominguez. His power potential is why his number is so high. But a lot of scouts still like the numbers that they're seeing out of him, but I don't. I see a lot of boom or bust in him, which is why I don't think his value is necessarily as high. The other pieces were Wells and Jones. There's Jones. And there's Wells. So just on its face, let's see if it's a validate trade. Minor overpay. So for those of you wondering, what would be a legitimate value for him? I think this is a pretty close to fair deal. Like I said, the Marlins might have to include a relief pitcher just to kind of push this deal across the finish line. But this is a minor overpay, and for a pitcher with some control left on that deal, that's what you pretty much have to do nowadays. So that deal would be pretty much a fair deal. Like I said, I think the Marlins could add another reliever. Just kind of looking at their roster real quick. You can even choose between the majors and minors to kind of make it easier for yourself. Let's look at the very bottom of this roster. Say they throw in a guy like a one-year guy like Floro. Honestly, I can't remember who he is off the top of my head, but that might make it a little bit more palatable to the Yankees. Or maybe they get a first baseman like Cooper if they're unable to bring back Rizzo. Something like that. Say they get Cooper out of it and don't have to go after Rizzo. Something like that. Boom. Trade's accepted. See, a small little piece going back to the Marlins makes this deal an absolute equal trade, essentially. I still think that the value for Peraza is a little bit overstated on this side. I think that's going to come down a little bit. I'm not saying it's going to go from like 27 down to like 20. Maybe more like 27 down to 25, 24. But he's still a very good prospect. I just don't think he's quite as high as everybody thinks. The other bit of news around Major League Baseball, of course, is that the LA Angels GM came out the other day and said, we're not trading Shohei Ohtani this offseason. Pretty much every GM around the league basically looks at that and scoffs, apparently, at this point. Major League Baseball reporters are basically are going out and asking other teams if they really believe that the Angels won't trade Shohei this offseason. I think if Shohei says, hey, I'm not coming back, I want him out of here, I don't want to play anymore, obviously the Angels are going to move him. But even short of that, I still think it's poor management by the Angels to go ahead and say we're not going to trade Shohei when this is the most value he's going to have right now with 1 year left. You get a full year of starts and hitting out of Shohei Ohtani if you're a team going for a World Series this year, going for that, a bye in that first round, the wild card round of the playoffs. You'd like to have a whole year of Shohei rather than 6 starts and the rest of it hitting, and that's assuming he's healthy at the time. Now, if something happens in April, say he tweaks his elbow and then requires Tommy John, then you really have sent yourself down a path, if you're the Angels, that you really get no value for Shohei. You lose him in free agency for nothing, and he goes to another team and just basically takes off from there. I'm not saying he's going to get injured. I'm just saying it's poor management by the Angels just to not allow the possibility of a trade this offseason. That would have been one of the biggest topics at the winter meetings, I believe, because I think Aaron Judge is going to sign probably by the Monday or Tuesday around winter meeting, or around the winter meetings anyway. And I think days 3 and 4 of the winter meetings would be all about Shohei talk. What's going to happen? The answer for the Yankees if they don't make the move. What's the answer for the Dodgers now that Judge is off the board and they're going to lose Trey Turner to another team out east, say the Philadelphia Phillies? Do they turn to a guy like Shohei Ohtani as a starting pitcher? But Shohei Ohtani should be on the market if I were the Angels GM. Just curious just to see what his value would be like, just to kind of clear out the trade. Angels, there's your value. With 1 year left on his deal, Shohei Ohtani is worth 52. He's basically a superstar level player on both sides of the mound anyway, starting pitching and at the plate. Absolutely fantastic player. You get 2 all-star level players for the price of 1. That's why that would have been the highest trade package ever possibly if they had traded him at the deadline last year, which I still think they should have done, or maybe even the offseason before. They were not going to win much this year. I did not expect them to win. And so I just think it's poor management by a team not to have realistic expectations for what your roster is going to do. The Rangers, for instance, they improved their offense last year. They're going to improve their pitching. I still think they need a closer, but they're a team that's going to make a big jump in the standings this year. They lost a whole bunch of one-run games for the second straight year. That tells me a lot about their starting pitching and their relief pitching. I expect their win-loss record to improve by 15, 20 games. If you guys remember back in April and May, they were right around 500 and then just kind of fell off a cliff after that, and that's because that bullpen was healthy the first 2 months and wasn't the rest of the way. You are 100% correct. Judge did it, but he made out some other players don't. There's going to be a lot of conversation about what's going to happen with Aaron Judge. I'm very curious to see if the Giants ultimately are able to pry him away from the Yankees. I think his preference would be to stay with the Yankees. I just think not that he's not feeling appreciated by the Yankees fan base or by the GM or anything like that. I just think I think he's tired of these, not necessarily lowball offers, but offers that he's not even going to consider because they're 6 years in length. He's 31 years old. He wants that mega long-term deal, the deals that Albert Pujols and Prince Fielder have got. Obviously, we saw those deals as negatives, but at the time, everybody was cheering because the first 6 years of the deal were supposed to be great. Obviously, in hindsight, both of those deals didn't, but he wants that level of pay for this time frame. Just looking at the deals that have been signed in the last few years, Corey Seager gets 10 years, $325 million. Sure, he was a 27-year-old shortstop, but he's not going to stick at shortstop for the Rangers for the rest of that deal. Looking at the other, he doesn't really have a comp on the market over the past 10 years just because there's never really been a free agent like Aaron Judge. I mean, he's by far the best hitter on this market. He's by far the best outfielder on this market. Center field, Brendan Nimmo's the set center fielder. That's the only other player that's kind of by himself in this market, aside from Edwin Diaz, and he's already gone. But Aaron Judge is a one-of-a-kind talent on this market, and he's going to get a very nice very nice payday. Yankees play games with their players. They do sometimes. I don't think they play the level of games that they do that fans seem to think. But I think that they could do a lot more. as far as the way they handle it in the public sphere. I understand it's a contract negotiation. You don't want to give away everything. But you can at least say, hey, we really appreciate the player. We appreciate his time here. We don't undervalue him. We think he's the heartbeat of this team. We want to keep him around. We think he is the heart and soul going forward for the rest of our future. And we're going to do everything we can to keep him. Whatever his contract demands are, our door is always open to talk to him about those demands. We want to see whatever would make Aaron Judge happy, makes the Yankees happy, because we care about the player Aaron Judge. Now, does that mean they have to give him, $500 million a year? No, but I'm just saying that's the level of comments that they should be making. Not the, well, we got a lot of luxury tax concerns to consider. We have a lot of money already tied up in other players. We're trying to go with some young guys. There are some other interesting free agents out there on the market that we could turn to. While Aaron Judge is certainly a great player, we really appreciate what he's done for the franchise. We still would really like to have him back, blah, blah, blah. But we still see it as a contract negotiation, and we'll see what ultimately ends up getting decided. That's a whole lot different than what I said the first time around, and I think the Yankees would be wise to change the way they talk about it. A little bit more news around Major League Baseball. The Rangers have already reached out to pretty much most of the agents, as most teams have anyway, but they've already waged heavily into starting pitching market. Sounds like they've already gotten an interest from Jacob deGrom, whereas deGrom has already said that he likes likes the idea of going to play for the Rangers. That's why the New York Mets media, the John Heymans of the world, the Joel Shermans of the world from the New York Post, have already said the Mets feel themselves as kind of a second place runner in this race anyway, and that's why they're going to try to put their best offer forward quickly for Jacob deGrom. And if he passes on it, they're going to move on to their other free agents and other targets in free agency, most notably Brandon Nimmo. But for Jacob deGrom, it sounds like the Mets aren't really going to sit around and wait to the winter meetings for him to decide which team he wants to play for. It sounds like they want to get this decision done quickly, and it sounds like the Rangers are already out there talking to him just to make sure that they're not being, letting the Mets have this early window only to talk to him. I mean, it's fair game right now for the Rangers to try to negotiate with him, and I expect some type of a deal to be reached around the winter meetings as well. This is going to be one of the most active winter meetings we've seen probably in the last 6-7 years, so we'll see what ends up happening. But I already requested off of work. I'll be live with you guys all during the winter meeting, so make sure you hit that subscribe button. We'll put out a whole bunch of short videos around that time as well. We'll be live at multiple points throughout the day and then putting out short videos in between, just so you guys don't miss out on anything that's going to happen. So do you think we'll have quick signings? Absolutely. We've already seen a couple of re-signings. Edwin Diaz is probably the most notable, followed by Clayton Kershaw is probably going to be inked here in a few days. I think they're just kind of hammering out terms of the deal. But for my money, I believe that this is going to be a very fast free agent market. And if you're not paying attention, you're going to see a lot of these top-end free agents go, and then you're going to be left going through the scraps the rest of the offseason after the winter meetings. That's why the trade market is going to be very active as well, because it's a very top-heavy free agency class. After that, the depth kind of really falls off for you. I mean, the second best outfielder outside of Aaron Judge is probably Mitch Haniger, outside or not considering Brandon Nimmo. I'm putting him in his own separate category as far as center fielders, so I don't consider him part of the outfield class. But Aaron Judge by himself, Mitch Haniger, and then everybody else on the market. Now, of course, there's the names like Michael Conforto, who was extended a qualifying offer last year, didn't sign with the team this year, and I told you guys last night that was because he wasn't able to extend all the way through his swing. Scott Boras, this is very telling during his press conference yesterday when he was describing the free agency for Michael Conforto, how they're looking for a deal very similar to Carlos Rodon, the deal that he got with the Giants. They're kind of looking for a 1+1 type of a deal, how that might work for him. But they were saying how he was finally able to have full extension on his swing, his power was back, and all those kinds of things. Those were the things that you were saying at the trade deadline. Obviously, he wasn't healthy enough then. What makes us think that the swing is back? And, by the way, he's missed a whole year. How exactly is he going to be able to handle major league level pitching in his first year back from injury? If I'm looking at that type of a deal for Michael Conforto, I say no thanks if I'm a team that's even thinking about playoff contention this year, because I can't count on him. Now, teams that are not in playoff contention, say like the Pirates that are just trying to improve around the edges, they could make a play for him. Maybe a guy like Joey Gallo as well goes to that type of a market. But if you're looking at a playoff contending type of situation, you want proven performance, you want consistency and availability, and Michael Conforto cannot give you that. But his free agency is going to be very interesting. Other pitchers the Rangers market has already started to get into are the Carlos Rodon market. I think he's probably the second best pitcher on the market by a mile. I just really like the way he's been able to pitch. There was concerns about his durability last offseason. That's why he took a 1+1 year deal with the Giants. Everybody saw his arm kind of wear down a little bit last year, anyway, with the Chicago White Sox. That's why he took that pillow deal, the 1+1 deal with the Giants. Performed very well, 2.84, 2.82 ERA, very similar numbers. However, his performance did not dip at all during the entire season. Stayed healthy. He was fantastic. And I expected him to be dealt at the trade deadline, honestly. I thought there would have been a number of teams that could have used him. Hey, looking at you, Yankees. Now what do you think about your starting staff? Just saying, you could have used another starter in the postseason. Anyway, that's beside the point. But Carlos Rodon is going to be the second best starter on the market. The Rangers, I would be shocked if they get both of those starters. I think they probably get one of the two, but they're going to certainly try to get both. Remember last year, nobody thought they were going to get two of the top 5 shortstops on the market in Marcus Semien and Corey Seager. They got both. So maybe they double dip at the top of the market again now that Clayton Kershaw has already been solved. Remember, I told you guys at the top of the show today that they were setting aside about $20 to $22 million for Clayton Kershaw if he decided to go to Texas. Obviously, now it looks like he's going to the Dodgers. They can put that money towards other players. Looking at the amount of money that they're looking to spend this offseason, between $60 and $75 million in salary that they're going to add to next year's payroll. Say they give DeGrom $40 million, $45 million. Rodon is looking for something around 30, so that would get you close to that $75 million mark. And that's exactly what the Rangers would really love to do. If they can get 2 top-level starters like that to put at the head of their rotation, and then turn around and bring back a guy like Martin Perez, that would be fantastic for them. Or even if they just get one of the 2 players. Put DeGrom there, then you put Perez at your 2, Gray as your 3, Odorizzi as your 4, and then Dane Dunning or something like that as your 5, with a whole bunch of young kids that are ready to come up in about a year. That looks a whole lot better. Cole Winn, the Al Leiter's kid, Jack. Is it Jack? I can't remember his name off the top of my head. But they also brought in Kumar Rocker as well in the draft. They've got a lot of good, young, talented starting pitchers that are on the cusp of hitting AAA and then the major league level. So they're going to have to free up some spots in about a year or two. So we might not see the length of deals for like Martin Perez, but I think they'd be very happy to get DeGrom for whatever he ends up wanting. But to answer your question, what does Rodon get paid? There was a projection out there for 4 years, $128 million. I actually have MLB trade rumors up right now, the 50 free agents, etc. Let's see what they have it for. Hmm. 8 years, 268. Sorry, I don't think that's happening. Okay, so 5 years, $140 million. If that's the price right now for Carlos Rodon, I think the Rangers immediately say, "Yep, sign me up right now." In case you're wondering, that's what, a $28 million average annual value, I believe. $28 million. That would be fantastic for a starting pitcher. I think the contract is probably going to be more in the range of I think it's going to get to 5 years, but I think the average annual value is going to be very close to $32 million a year for Carlos Rodon. And so I think you're probably looking more in the range of 5 years at 60, something like that, rather than the 5 years at 140. But the Mets, I believe, could have interest. The Phillies are looking to improve their starting staff. I don't think they're going to play at that level just because I think they want to improve their offense yet again. But to answer your question, 5 years, 160, something like that, I think ultimately ends up getting it done. For DeGrom, I think you're looking very similar contract to the Max Scherzer deal. 3 years, $130 million was that deal. I think you're probably looking in the neighborhood of a 4-year deal. I think that the Rangers would be willing to do that if that guarantees them the player. That might even, they're probably going to give him $43 million or $43.1 million just to kind of give him over the top of that deal that he signed, or that Max Scherzer signed. Would be the biggest deal ever for a starting pitcher. All right, let's kind of go through some of these contract projections a little bit, starting at the top with Aaron Judge. Now, remember, the site that I'm using is MLB Trade Rumors. That's kind of their projections right now. Everybody's pretty much picking the Yankees as the team for him. I would probably pick the Yankees as well. I don't think this is I don't think this is the deal that ultimately gets it done, though. 8 years at $332. I don't think it's going to be anything less than a 10-year deal. Average annual value sounds about right, but I think you're looking at 10 at $400. Second, they have Carlos Correa, 9 years at 288. The average annual value again is about right. I wonder about the years though. I think he wants to beat the Corey Seager numbers that Corey Seager got last year. But the Dodgers have been really frugal with their money. I think the team that's going to get him is either the loser of whoever doesn't get Aaron Judge, which could be the Giants like they have on here. I think the Dodgers will be right there though because they're going to miss out on a guy like Aaron Judge, or they're going to miss out on a guy like Trey Turner. They could go a little bit cheaper and go with Xander Bogaerts. Then they'd have three of the top four players as far as most consistent hitter in Major League Baseball over the last 5 years in Freddie Freeman, Mookie Betts, and then Xander Bogaerts. But for my money, I still think Carlos Correa ends up going to the Dodgers. Now, there is some conflict within the organization about whether or not they even want to bring him back. Remember, Carlos Correa was part of that team that had the sign stealing scandal back in 2017 when they beat the Dodgers for the World Series. There are some people within the organization that really like the player, but don't like that he was associated with the Astros team. And so that might cause you some hesitation and cause you to think, well, maybe he'll go to the Giants. But I don't think he ends up going back to the Twins. I just don't think there's a way he goes back there. I think he really liked his time there. I just think he wants to play for a postseason team every year. And I don't think that's necessarily the case in Minnesota as much as I, as a Twins fan, would like that to be. But third on the list, Trey Turner. Again, average annual value, still about right. The age for him is 31. However, I think his power numbers that he's added over the past 3 or 4 years make an 8-year deal seem a little bit cheap anyway. I think he'll still end up going to the Phillies, and if it's his preferred destination, maybe he does take 8 years just to make sure he goes where he wants to play. As for all, he was traded to the Dodgers and didn't really like playing on the West Coast apparently. Wants to head back to the East Coast, really liked everything over there. And so the average annual value, this could ultimately end up being the right deal. So this is actually a pretty fair offer. But if he doesn't take the discount for going back to the East Coast and says, hey, I want my 10 years, then you're looking probably at something north of the money that Corey Seager got last year. Xander Bogaerts, this deal isn't too bad either, but I still think it's not quite enough. I think the Dodgers could be right there if they're unable to sign Carlos Correa or if they have too many conflicts about signing Carlos Correa. But I think they get one of Carlos Correa or Xander Bogaerts goes to the Dodgers. I think their ship has sailed on them keeping Trey Turner, and I don't think they're going to move over Gavin Lux. I just don't think that's going to happen. Now, say they do get Aaron Judge and they put him in right, they move Mookie Betts to second, and they flex Gavin Lux over to short. That's the only way I see that something like that happening. That would be a great move for LA. But I just don't think that's the level or that's the type of move they need to make. I think they got too many holes on that roster to invest that level of money in a player. But they have a dynamic roster, that's for sure. Fifth on the list, Dansby Swanson. This deal, I mentioned earlier, 7 at around 200, 190, something like that. I think that's what ultimately gets the deal done. I think the Cubs are probably the most likely outside of the Braves. I think the money the Braves saved, or are trying to save at least anyway, to try to stay in this market. If this is the deal that it ultimately signs, I think he goes back to Atlanta. But if that deal gets up into the 180, 190, $200 million deal for over 7, 8 years, then I think he ultimately ends up going to the Cubs. Carlos Rodon, I mentioned that already. If DeGrom doesn't go to the Rangers, I think Rondon is absolutely going to be a Texas Ranger. I think that's absolutely going to happen. I don't think there's any doubt about it. I think the money is going to be there for the Rangers. They will spend the most on whichever starting pitcher will take their money. And it sounds like DeGrom is very interested, and I still think they're probably the favorites at this point for DeGrom. But Rodon is going to be right there if they don't get him. Jacob DeGrom, 3 years, 135. Remember last year it was 130 over 3 years for Max Scherzer. That would be about the deal it would ultimately end up getting for the Rangers. Maybe add on another year just to convince him to leave New York, something like that. But in either event, I'm not worried about the injury issues. And even if I was, just to get a pitcher of his caliber on your roster as an absolute ace, absolutely vital for the Rangers going forward. They need a starting pitcher. They have to get one. They have to make the postseason this year. That's an organizational mandate. We'll see if that ends up happening. All right, moving on to number 8 on their list, Justin Verlander. A little bit surprised by the term on this deal, 3 years at 120. Remember, he kind of took a 1+1 year deal last year, and that was coming off of injury. He's 39 years old. I think it's more of a 2-year deal, probably in that $40 million range, a little bit below Max Scherzer, a little bit below a guy like Jacob DeGrom, but I think that's the type of a deal that would get it done. So we'll see what ends up happening. But for me, it's 2 years at $40 million a year. Um, that seems about right for Justin Verlander. Brendan Nimmo, as I mentioned, he's the only center fielder on the market this year of any value at all. I mean, the next best center fielder is going to be a tie probably between Kevin Kiermaier and Kevin Pillar. That's the level of free agent after Brendan Nimmo. So he is going to get a lengthy deal, I believe, this summer. Most center fielders, when they reach their age 30 season, everybody starts wondering about their wheels falling off, etc. Remember last year with Starling Marte, I think he took a little bit of a discount taking that 4-year deal as opposed to a 5-year deal elsewhere that I think he easily could have gotten. But I think it's very similar terms for a guy like Brendan Nimmo, except a little bit more because he's the only real center fielder on the market. So this deal, 5 years, 110, that sounds almost just about right. Now, there's a lot of center field interest anyway. There's not a lot of center fielders on the market. Brian Reynolds is an option anyway for a team that misses out. There's going to be a heavy trade interest in a lot of other center fielders out there that aren't on the free agent market. But 5 years, 110 sounds about right as far as who could he go to. Mets are still my favorite for him because I think DeGrom is going to leave the Mets and they're going to keep him there and lock that position up. And so I think the term and the team are about right on these projections here. Number 10 on their list, Wilson Contreras, 4 years, $84 million. There's already been interest anyway from the Detroit Tigers. They've expressed interest in a lot of catchers over the past couple of years. A little bit surprising that they've done so much heavy interest anyway in the catching position. They've invested in their catching position as well, though. That's why I'm kind of curious why they've already reached out to Wilson Contreras' camp. The team that I could see him going to is the New York Mets. I think they're really interested in getting him in there. Welcome back, Clay. But I do think DeGrom does go south as well. But Wilson Contreras, the top catcher on the free agent market, the top catcher I think overall could be Sean Murphy anyway from the Oakland A's. He will be dealt. They're going to go with Shea Langeliers as their catcher. But Sean Murphy has been one of the top 5 catchers in the league over the past few years. His offensive numbers are great. He has very good defensive numbers as well. Very well-rounded catcher, whereas Wilson Contreras is more of a bat. The term here sounds about right, 4 years. $84 million, maybe higher, maybe lower. I think it might be a little bit higher, but think of Kyle Schwarber's deal that he signed with the Philadelphia Phillies. Very similar as far as a bat-first type of a player. So that's kind of where I think the comp comes in. But didn't have the greatest year this past year. I wonder which team is ultimately willing to pay that. He could go to a team that's in a complete rebuild. Like on here, they have the Diamondbacks as a possibility. I understand that as a spot for him. I think the Cubs, if the price stays at about, say, 65, 70 million, I think he could end up back in Chicago. I just don't think that's very likely, though. I think he's going to get 4 at 80, and so I think that prices him out of their market. So for me, teams that need catching are not the Twins. Sorry. The Astros could use another offensive-minded catcher. They were very interested in bringing him in. James Click, however, was not interested at all in bringing him in. It was the owner, Jim Crane, that was interested. But the Rays are going to have an opening, but I don't see them spending at that level. They had interest in Freddie Freeman last year. That was a little bit of a surprise where they offered 6 years at $150 million total. That was a little bit surprising, but I don't expect them to play on that type of a bat-only type of a player in Contreras. So if I had to guess out of those teams, I guess the Diamondbacks probably make the most sense out of their teams. But I'm still convinced that the Mets are going to add a catcher, and I think they're going to add one for sure that's more of a bat. And so that makes a lot of sense there. If they lose DeGrom, to spend their money on Nimmo, another starting pitcher, bringing back Chris Bassett, keeping around Carlos Carrasco, and then bringing in a catcher like Wilson Contreras and maybe adding a designated hitter. Spreading out their money like that. Something like that makes a lot more sense to me if I'm a Mets fan. Alrighty. Number 11 on their list, Kodai Senga. 5 years, $75 million is what they're expecting. Remember, he's a true free agent this offseason. He's not subject to the posting system. You don't have to worry about submitting bids and waiting your time, etc. No, you can sign him outright. So 5 years, $75 million. The term sounds about right as far as the length. I expect something like that. He's 30 years old coming into the season, or coming into this year, 31. I'm not sure if they have their information right. I saw one site have 31. This one has 30. But in either event, there's a lot of interest in him. I don't see him going to the Red Sox. While they're interested in adding some starting pitching, I think they're looking for their health to get a little bit better internally. They're going to try Garrett Whitlock. They're going to add another starter as well. I believe they're going to add 2 starters. I just think there's going to be more interest from other teams rather than the Red Sox. So if I had to handicap this race, a team like the Blue Jays makes a lot of sense to me because they're looking to add 1 starter. They're looking for internal growth from their pieces that they already have as well. But adding a piece like Senga would be a good fit for them. The Mariners have already reached out as well. They could use a 5th starter. They have 4 top flight options already and a couple of back end starting options that they could move to the bullpen or trade this offseason. If they bring in Senga, that gives them 5 very good rotation pieces. And then they could flip those other pieces out there to fill other holes that they have. They also have stated an interest in bringing in a couple of outfielders. But for my money, I would say that probably the Blue Jays are the handicap favorite there. Josh Bell, 4 years, $64 million. He stumbled a little bit in his second half of the season after the trade to San Diego. I wonder if he's looking for more of a pillow type deal this offseason. First basemen don't get paid really this anymore, especially if you're a power hitter and that's the only skill set you have. He did hit 302. I'm wondering what ends up happening as far as if that bat comes back. Because remember, in the second half of the season, he was only hitting like 215, somewhere in that range. But as far as a contract, if he's willing to go for a long term, 4 years, 64 sounds about right. Astros are going to look for a first baseman. They no longer have Yuli Gurriel. They just declined the option on Trey Mancini. Josh Bell was a guy they were heavily rumored to be interested in at the trade deadline. So if they don't get a guy like Wilson Contreras behind the plate as a bat, I think Josh Bell would be a nice fit for them in Houston. Chris Bassett is next on their list. They say 3 years at 60. I think that's a little bit cheap. I think he's, 34? Something like that, 33, 34 years old. But he's pitched very well over the past 3 or 4 years. I think the Twins are indeed a very good team for him. I think if the Rangers don't end up with a guy like Jacob deGrom, they could go with multiple starters. They have John Gray already in-house. I think they will keep Martin Perez. Beyond that, they don't really have much outside of Jake Odorizzi, that kind of thing. But again, that's more of a 5th-starter option. If you can get a top-end guy like this to say yes to come to your team, you do it. But say they don't get deGrom, maybe Chris Bassett could be in the mix. But I think he's going to look for a contending team. I think the Mets are going to ultimately end up getting him just because it worked out really well for him in New York in his first year there. He is an older pitcher, so he kind of fits the ability to handle New York as well. You never really know in New York if they're going to be able to handle the bright lights and all that. And it's been more of a problem with the Yankees than it has been the Mets. But it's still New York. You still have to have some level of maturity, and I expect him to ultimately end up back with the Mets. As far as the contract, I'm expecting probably 4 years. Again, there's not a lot of great starting pitchers out there, so these short-term deals, I'm not expecting that to happen. So I'm expecting probably 4 years, maybe 90, 95 million, maybe even 100, just to kind of get him over that $20 million a year mark, $25 million a year mark. But 4 years, around $90 to $100 million, maybe back to the Mets if they lose out on deGrom. Jameson Taillon is next on their list. I saw one projection for 4 years at 64. They have 4 years at 56. I still think it's going to be on the higher end as well. Injury issues have been the biggest thing for him. He has posted some good numbers, stayed relatively healthy over the past few years with the Yanks, and he pitched in New York. So say he moves somewhere else, and maybe he'll have better numbers moving out of the AL East. Teams that need starting pitching that's not going to cost a whole lot. Think of the John Gray contract last year with the Texas Rangers, 4 years, around 60, I think is what he ended up signing for, 4 years, maybe a little bit less than that. I can't remember the exact number on it, but something like that is very similar to the contract I expect here. I'm expecting closer to probably the $65 to $70 million than I am the 60 to 55 range. But they have the teams about right. I think the Tigers need starting pitching. The Orioles need starting pitching. He fits the timeline for the Orioles as well. So if I'm handicapping the race, the Orioles make the most sense. But again, that stays in the AL East. He may want to move elsewhere if he wants to have better numbers, that kind of thing, in case he wants to have another bite at the apple after this. Next on the list, Andrew Benintendi. I've seen projections as high as 6 years at $100 million for him. No way in heck is that ever going to happen for Andrew Benintendi. Sorry, I'm wondering if that was even the agent that put that one out there. But 4 years, $54 million for a bat-only type of a player, left-handed hitter. Bat-to-ball skills finally returned last year after having a down few years anyway with the Red Sox. I'm not sure as far as team, just because there's too many teams out there that could use an outfield bat. They do mention the Rangers as a possibility. I don't think the Rangers are that interested in a guy like Andrew Benintendi. They are looking for more of a contact type hitter, but I'm not sure if Benintendi is their type of hitter. Um, but as far as contract, probably in the neighborhood of 3 to 5 years is what I'd expect. If I had to put my guess on it, 4 years sounds about right. As far as the number, 54 to 70, I think, is what it's going to ultimately end up being. Notice how I'm going over on most of these projections because it seems like these offers look a little bit conservative to me. The only offers that were at least close anyway were the top few, where we saw the average annual value for Trey Turner be about right at around 30 plus million dollars a year over 8 years, something like that. But overall, these numbers have been a little bit conservative. 16, Taijuan Walker, 4 years at 52. Sorry, the average annual value is a little too low. I still think starting pitching is going to get paid this offseason. I think you're looking at probably a 16 to $17 million offer here for Taijuan Walker. 4 years sounds about right. So again, same teams as before. Orioles, teams that are looking for, starting pitching. The Giants, if they lose Rodon, would be a good fit for them. Sean Manaea didn't pitch great in his time with the Padres, which is why I think this term sounds about right. 4 years at 52. Think of him as kind of that buy low candidate in free agency, kind of like John Gray again. That's the second time I mentioned him last year. But if Gray had stayed healthy last year, we would have seen a very productive numbers anyway for John Gray. Think of that when you look at Sean Manaea as far as the contract he gets. They mentioned the Royals could be a suitor. They're going to bring back Zach Greinke as kind of their veteran in the room. I don't think they're going to look at the top end market for starting pitching, but this is kind of the roof of what I think the Royals could do this offseason. I still don't think this is a great move for them because they need to get their young starting pitchers some experience. They could use an innings eater, but that's a little bit rich for an innings eater type of pitcher, especially when you think the Rangers just paid $2.5 million for a guy who can eat a few innings rather than $52 million. Andrew Heaney, they're expecting 3 at 42. Sounds close. I mean, you think back to the contracts for guys like Drew Smiley, those types of pieces. That's the kind of player I see Andrew Heaney as. So I'm not sure of the term on this one. I think it's a little bit rich because I don't think teams view him as a difference-making piece for them. But maybe they're going to buy low on him and think they're going to see something in him. That's what the Angels thought they had seen anyway when he was with the Yankees. That hey, we found something here with Andrew Heaney. Obviously, not so much. But I still think maybe a 2-year deal around $20 million total sounds about right for Andrew Heaney. Jose Abreu is another piece I'm interested in just because of the Houston Astros. I understand the White Sox are probably going to make some moves anyway with their roster. Andrew Vaughn is going to slide over to first. Eloy Jimenez probably take a lot of at-bats at the DH spot. So there's not really a spot for Jose Abreu to go back there. He is a little bit older of a player. He's looking to win. I don't see him going to a place like the Cubs. Sorry, you're not a playoff contending team. Mariners could use a first baseman. The Twins, they declined the option on Miguel Sano. They could use a first baseman as well. But for my money, I think the Astros are a dark horse candidate for Jose Abreu. I think even more so than a guy like Josh Bell, just because of what the Jose Abreu stands for as far as what he represents for the Astros. Consistency, high on base percentage guy, that's what the Astros really like. Josh Bell had a sluggish second half, and I think that might be the argument for why Jose Abreu might be a better fit in Houston. And of course, like I mentioned, the White Sox are not going to be able to keep him on the roster. And by the way, just for information, or food for thought anyway, the White Sox play the Astros in the opening game of the season. Maybe the schedule makers know something about what could happen there. Next on the list, Mitch Haniger, the top outfield option in my opinion outside of Aaron Judge and Nimmo. 3 years, 39 sounds a little bit low in my opinion. I think the term is about right just because you're not sure about the injury issues with him. The Mariners are expected to add a couple of outfielders. I wonder if they're going to add via trade, though, as opposed to free agency. I think they would like to have Haniger back, but I think that that teams might price him out. As far as contract, 3 years, like I said earlier, sounds about right. But I'm thinking more around $50 million for Mitch Haniger, 55 even. When he is healthy, he's a dynamic bat in the lineup. The question is, can he stay healthy? And for an investment around $15 to $17 million a year, If you're looking for that piece to kind of finish off your club, that could make the difference for you. I don't think the Angels are a good fit. Sorry, I don't think you should be investing in pieces like this. I think you should be selling away pieces as much as possible, not trying to add on pieces to this roster. I think that the Angels need to tear it down. I'm sorry, they just do. Noah Syndergaard, 3 at 36. Remember, he signed a 1 year, $20 million this past offseason with the Angels. Traded midseason, did not have a great year. His K numbers were similar anyway, but I mean, they weren't great. I mean, it was his worst numbers of his career as far as strikeout rate, but they still weren't fantastic. His numbers, I wonder if they're going to continue to downturn, which is why I worry about the term on this one. So maybe more of a 2 year high AAV, say like 18 million. So 18 even might be a little rich, probably in the neighborhood of like 15. But maybe just name recognition alone will get him a better average annual value. 3 at 36 is what, $12 million a year? I think that's a little bit light. I just worry about the term length. I'm wondering if it's more of a 2 year deal as opposed to 3. We'll go through about 25 on this list and then check in on just a couple of other stories before we check out for the evening. But Anthony Rizzo, we already mentioned him. As far as the Yankees, how they have to bring him back. They have a hole at first base. If they do make that trade that we mentioned earlier with Pablo Lopez, maybe they bring back Garrett Cooper and save some money. But the qualifying offer, $19.7 million is what the qualifying offer is on the table for Anthony Rizzo. 2 years, 36 sounds about right, though. That's very similar to the contract that he signed last offseason, except, of course, with the opt-out. Maybe they'll give him another opt-out after this year, but they really love his defense and leadership abilities in the clubhouse. We saw how troublesome that was down the stretch, where Rizzo basically had to take over the vocal role as leader in that clubhouse, especially with the issues that they had with Aroldis Chapman, Aaron Judge not necessarily being the most vocal guy in the clubhouse, but they should really consider bringing him back, whether or not they keep Aaron Judge or not, just because of what he meant to that team. But the term sounds about right. Money sounds about right. Nathan Eovaldi, I think the Red Sox are probably where he ends up going again. He could be used as one of the back end of the rotation starters, and then in the postseason is used more of a high leverage bullpen type of a guy. I don't see him anymore as a 1 or 2 in a rotation. 2 years at $34 million, that's a little bit rich, but I think the 2 years part sounds good. The money, though, just doesn't sound quite right. I just wonder about the injury issues, if they're willing to, how willing a team is going to be to go over $15 million a year. So if I'm looking at Nathan Eovaldi, I'm probably looking 2 years at $13 million. So that's 2 years at 26. Taylor Rogers, 3 at 30. Struggled anyway with the Brewers. He's pitched well. He's a good, decent option anyway as far as a bullpen piece. There's a lot of teams out there that are going to need some closing potential. Rangers, I'm looking at you. They have a lot of money to spend this offseason. But any team that needs bullpen this year, the Phillies make a lot of sense. It's kind of adding to their back end. So 3 years, 30 sounds about right. And if I had to handicap a team, I would say the Phillies. Last that we're going to go over anyway is J.D. Martinez, 2 years at $30 million. Sounds about right as far as the money and both of the term. For my money, though, I think the Mets are probably the most likely here just because they've been interested in him in the past. They just couldn't get across the finish line at the deadline. They need to improve their designated hitter spot. I don't think they want to necessarily go with a platoon again at that spot, and so I think J.D. Martinez would be a perfect fit there. Guardians, they mentioned here, I don't think that's going to happen. I think they would like to add around the fringes, but I don't think they'd add a DH like J.D. Martinez to their roster. Orioles, I don't think that's the right player for them. Mariners, I could be convinced there. They could add a bat and maybe use that some of their players that they were using at DH anyway and flex them to their outfield spot, and that feels one of their outfield additions that they were looking to add this offseason. But yeah, we'll stop there anyway as far as this projection list. But just to kind of recap some of the other news on the market, the Giants had more news come out today that they're going to be competing for top-tier guys like Judge, DeGrom. We already mentioned the DeGrom news that he likes Texas. That was coming from John Heyman. And more news from John Heyman that it looks like Abreu is done in Chicago. Mentioned that as well. But the Giants, it looks like, are going to be playing on the top end of the free agent market. Just to kind of look at some of the top free agents out there. We've already mentioned DeGrom. We've mentioned Aaron Judge anyway. Those are the guys that I think are going to be at the top of the list for them. If they don't, or say the Rangers bring in Jacob DeGrom, I think Rodon probably goes back to San Francisco, and then they try to get their hands on one of the free agent shortstops out there. But we could see something like that happen. Looks like the Angels are checking in on some of the Tampa Bay Rays pitchers. We already saw Ji-Man Choi from the Rays go to the Pirates. Remember, Ryan Yarbrough, Yoni Chirinos, and Sean Armstrong, among others, are available, according to John Paul Morosi. But the Angels are looking for low-cost options to add to their team. Not surprising because they've spent a lot of money in recent years. Anthony Rendon really hasn't worked out at all for the Angels. Most of the free agent deals that the Angels have inked in recent memory have not worked out. Almost every single one of them has flopped. And that's just horrible luck. No GM is quite that bad, and the Angels have to get something right. They're going to have to pare down this payroll at some point. They're going to have to sell at some point. I think they should have already started at least a year ago, if not 2 years ago, but they are where they are, and so maybe they add around the edges, and who knows what they end up doing. But that seems to be the avenue that they're going down right now. And of course, as we mentioned last night, the Phillies are the top suitor for Trey Turner. He's expressed interest in going to Philadelphia, as well as the Phillies having him on their list back in July, along with Xander Bogaerts. So that's kind of your news right now. But if you have any questions, feel free to send them to us. We'll see if we can answer them for you guys. Really appreciate those of you who subscribed tonight. Thank you very much. Appreciate the conversation. Welcome back, Clay. Really appreciate you joining us again for another evening. Bryce, Robert, all of you that participated in our chat, we really appreciate it. We'll have another live for you guys tomorrow evening. Hopefully we won't start as late in the evening. We'll start a little bit earlier, and we'll also try to get a little bit of NFL news for you guys as well. For those of you wondering, it looks like there might be some actual steam in the direction of Odell Beckham Jr. going to the Dallas Cowboys. A lot of conversations both between the players through social media on the Dallas Cowboys roster, trying to convince him to come to them. It's been pretty much nonstop every single day. Another player from the Cowboys is trying to reach out to Odell Beckham Jr. Hey, come be a part of us. Join us. We want you. We think we'd have 3 number 1 receivers, depending on what you think of Michael Gallup. But they view it as 3 number 1s with Gallup, Lamb, and Odell Beckham Jr. But we'll have that live for you guys tomorrow as well. But thank you guys for a great evening. And we'll see you guys tomorrow night. As I mentioned, if you guys want to send any comments on these videos, if you ever want to have any questions for us, fantasy football trades, whatever the case may be, if you have a suggestion for a game that you want us to do, send us a comment on one of our videos. We get those comments here, so we try to read every single one of those comments. We don't respond to all of them, but we try to respond to the ones that ask us questions. But feel free to send us any comment, any question that you have, and we'll be sure to take a look at it and try to get back to you. But thank you guys for joining us here tonight. We'll see you guys tomorrow evening. Probably be around 8:30 when we do go live. But appreciate you guys, and y'all have a great evening.